Welcome to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring authentic stories of personal growth and lessons learned from people living true to themselves with creativity, passion, and purpose. For all past episodes, subscribe on iTunes or visit noscheduleman.com. And please connect, share, and contribute with a comment, rating, or review. And now, here's your host, the No Schedule Man, Kevin Bulmer.
I've been known to struggle with reality. Not that it is any real mystery.
The question this week is, what are you trying to get done? Through all of the noise, the problems, the potential, the policies, procedures, distractions, or market fluctuations, what does it all really come down to? In other words, what are you trying to get done? The solutions are often much simpler than we make them. Welcome, I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring conversations on personal and professional growth, authentically sharing in an effort to empower each other. You can find all past episodes of this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Google Play Music, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. And if you find it helpful, I hope you'll subscribe and stay the course with us. I also invite you to stay up to date by joining my free email newsletter. You can find that at kevinbulmer.com. Today we talk with Loretta Smith. Loretta is the founder and president of Genesis Executive Management Incorporated, which inspires business executives to effectively and efficiently challenge the status quo, drive results, and set the tone for excellence. Loretta and her team do this through executive coaching, human capital solutions, strategic thinking and training programs, and leadership development. She is well known for her integrity, her candor, and her broad vision. Loretta has developed a well-earned reputation of inspiring bold, smart action through a direct, no-nonsense approach, and for always being willing to immediately address the tough questions. Regardless of whether you're in a situation where you are in a business, owning a business, looking to start a business, or just looking to improve your life and on a journey of professional growth, trust me, you're going to take away a lot of really valuable stuff from this conversation with Loretta. Speaking with her was a breath of pure oxygen for me. She speaks with such incredible clarity on issues and ideas that I feel really passionate about, but I run into very few people who seem to see the natural crossover that I see from personal growth and into the business world on character traits such as authenticity, awareness, integrity, and truly understanding one's vision and values. So to hear Loretta speak was both exciting and truly educational. I've worked with and I've worked for my share of businesses who say that they're doing one thing or that they are one thing, and then they do another. And then they wonder why they have a difficult time holding on to good people and sustaining exceptional results over a sustained period of time. My recommendation for each of them is that they give Loretta a call. What you're about to hear, in my opinion, is incredibly valuable for anyone in business. Loretta shares all kinds of empowering, actionable information, and the best part about it is that it's all fundamentally pretty simple. With that in mind, here are just a few of the key points from our conversation that I thought I would highlight. Number one, the lost art of being a child, or in other words, complexity versus simplicity. Loretta explains pretty clearly about how we see things quite simply as children, and then we grow into making things more complex, and oftentimes we just get caught up in our own web of complexity that is really just stuff that we've kind of made up between each other and in between our own ears. We've lost the art of being a child and just seeing things for what they already are. Really quite simple. Number two, vision versus problem. Loretta gives just a crackerjack of an analogy when she mentions the film Apollo 13, which I now feel like I've got to go and see, having listened to this conversation. But she plays this out on the backdrop of imagining yourself in a meeting, and we've all been in them. If you've been in a business, if you've ever had a job, you've been dragged into a meeting, and most of the ones that I've been a part of, and to be completely honest, the ones that I've led, have started something like this. Here's the problem. Or this is what we're faced with today. Or now we got to come up with this, or this is the new procedure that we've, or in other words, here's the bad news and this is why you're going to like it anyway. But if you were to start with the vision And this plays into something that I talk about in one of my keynote talks, Rise Like a Phoenix, Race Like a Turtle. People ask me what it's about. I tell them resourcefulness, and their eyes glaze over because that's not a very sexy word. Well, the alarm bells were going off in my mind while Loretta was talking, that essentially what I'm referring to there is seeing your vision as opposed to focusing on the problem. So resourcefulness, the same as the vision, is let's look at what we can do. Let's talk about the solution, the possibilities, as opposed to just the problem. Is that it gets back to where we started. What is it that you're trying to do? What are we trying to get done here? What's the vision that we're here to achieve? And that's where things like your authenticity, your awareness, and your values all come into play, and how that's extrapolated out into the larger context of a business culture. But it keeps coming back into what's the vision? So from there, if you're willing to be resourceful, you can manage the problems by coming up with proactive solutions that fit the overall vision. It's an entire shift in a much higher vibration way to come at it, as opposed to, here's the latest problem. What are we going to do about it? And the analogy that she gives about the movie Apollo 13 that stars Tom Hanks was out a number of years ago. I'll let you listen for what she says about that. It's a good one. Number 3, are you actually seeing people or just observing? Now, this came up when I asked Loretta about authenticity, which again is a word that I use a lot that I think plays both in the personal growth world and into successful businesses. But I find that when I talk to business people about words like authenticity, their eyes roll back in their head. They don't seem to know what I mean. But Loretta knows. And in the business world, and looking at the people that you're relying upon to be able to serve your clients and your customers and represent your business in the marketplace, are you actually seeing those people? And what does that mean to actually see them? And what their experience is of being part of the culture of your business and trying to get your product or service to the market in a remarkable way. The difference between seeing them, truly seeing them and who they are, versus just observing them within the context of what maybe you want. Again, I'll leave it to Loretta to describe that in more detail, but listen for that and a whole lot of other incredible information. You're going to absolutely love this. Here is Loretta Smith of Genesis Executive Management on Journeys with the No Schedule Man. Loretta, why do you think that what we view as, quote, tough questions are even viewed as tough, as opposed to, say, fundamental?
Well, I don't think that we've been trained to deal with anything that's tough, really. Right back to days of high school, teachers didn't tackle tough issues. You go through university and professors don't tackle tough issues, and parents don't tackle tough issues. Everybody wants to skirt around them. So what really is just a normal issue that comes to the table considers to be tough, because very few people have experience dealing with any of it. So therefore, they label it as tough.
Let me ask it this way. Where were you in your life where you remember first kind of coming to terms with this realization for yourself?
Of being able to handle a tough situation?
Or even know what you just described to me, that these things aren't necessarily tough, it's just realistic, and I see people aren't dealing with them, so I will.
Well, I really saw it when it was in the business world, more so than in anything else before. I'm Italian. I grew up in a family where everything was discussed, and it was discussed openly. And I remember when I first brought my husband, my now husband, to dinner at the family. He said, "You guys argue all the time," and I said, "No, we don't argue. We discuss passionately." So I grew up with that. But when I came into the business world, and I'm going to play the female card, not that I'm comfortable playing it, but it is just when I would ask it what was to me a normal question, like exposing the elephant that was in the room, everybody would just be aghast. And I'm thinking, like, you've got to be kidding, because it's not like everybody doesn't know there's an elephant in the room. But I didn't understand how come they didn't want to talk about it and they didn't want to reveal that they knew, or, it was just this constant pretending that things didn't exist. And it came about more so in the business world than when I was lobbying or in the farming environment that I'm in, even though, farming is business, but we deal with elephants all the time. That's when when I was coaching people, when I was doing training and development, when I was recruiting for organizations, I thought, wow, you can't talk about what is normal to me, but you think is just very tough for you.
What comes to mind, to give context to some people that are listening, Loretta, of maybe not even common, but just what immediately comes to mind in terms of some of the quote-unquote elephants that maybe come up in the business world?
Well, I was coaching a senior executive within an organization for a very long time. He was head of operations, and every single session that we had, he would talk about the underperformers in the organization, or that were either directly or indirectly reporting to him. And it was constant. And I thought, okay, so I started asking questions like, what's the morale within the rest of the group? And he'd say, well, it wasn't really good. Well, who do you think is at fault with this? And it would always be somebody else's fault. And I said, no, this is your fault. And he just kind of looked at me and he says, why is it my fault? And I said, because you're not dealing with it. Like, what do you know you need to do? He said, I need to reprimand. Okay, fine. So, you go down a few months because HR tells them that, they have to reprimand. And then, a few months later, you're still on that same issue, that same person, that same department. Like, are you done reprimanding? Well, no, HR says we need to train them now. No, you don't. Just to me, it becomes clear. So I'd ask the question, if this was your money that you were investing into training this individual to become a more productive person in the organization, would you spend it? The answer was no. So, then I said, so now what do you know that you need to do? And he said, well, I need to go to HR. To do what? I prompted. And he said, what next steps are? And I said, no, to get the checkbook out. Like, how much is it going to cost you to keep them? How much is it going to cost them to let them go? I'm not all about, you have to terminate people, but I do know that in a world where it is your money, and it's always been my money when I'm dealing with companies because I own the company, then it's you have a more succinct flavor for what you have to do. And HR can come back with, the nice touchy-feely things. With all due respect to HR, we understand that you're the people department, but at the end of the day, you're there to support the business. And if a person is no longer supporting the business, so in other words, not making more money for the business than they are pulling out in salary, they're not needed anymore. So that's where I really started seeing how much of how uncomfortable people were with actually getting to the heart of the issue. So some of the coaching that I do is around zone of uncomfortable debate, and we get in there pretty quickly. Like, there are 3 circles in every single conversation that you have. Everybody talks about the nice touchy-feely things. That's a zone of comfortable debate. Okay, we're all talking about how was your weekend? How, what are you planning for Thanksgiving weekend? That's coming up here. And then you get into somebody put something on the table and said, you know what? We're delayed now. We have a really pressure cooker situation. People are going to have to come in for the weekend. Whoa, you're into an uncomfortable situation. You can decide to go in where the elephant is. And the elephant is saying, hey, we need, 50 people to come in on weekend to work, or you can choose to back out and pretend that it doesn't exist. My coaching pushes you to go into, you need to discuss this. You need to figure out what you're going to do. And yes, people are going to be upset. And yes, you're going to have the conversation.
How do you continue to put yourself into this kind of environment without getting completely exhausted by the resistances that I'm betting you can see coming before you ever even get to them?
I have a really great support system. I've been married for 42 years. My husband absolutely fabulous in the support system. So there are times when I've come home and I just want to vent. And he looks at me and he says, you done now? and it is hard. It's emotionally hard to get in there. But I have seen over the years that I've been doing this that people already know. Like, they'll see the look on my face. I have a very expressive face, and they'll say, okay, I know you want, yeah, we're going to go into the center, aren't we? Yeah, we're going to go into the center. And they know what they need to do. And they stop pretending that it exists. So those are the things that are exceptionally rewarding when you're seeing that you're making impact, that you're helping somebody to actually deal with uncomfortable situations, deal with conflict, deal with the real issues. Because the rest of it just becomes a story. And the story is even more exhausting because it's, well, if we use that scenario about somebody, having to bring in a number of people to work on a long weekend, and it's just, if you don't deal with it, you're going to be worried about, well, what will they say? How will they react? If you've already had the conversation, you just move forward.
I'm wondering how, and as I'm asking this question in my mind, Loretta, it seems too broad and big, but I'll take a crack at it. But I'm wondering how the dominoes fall in a large corporate environment. You've already talked about pointing back to HR, and I think we're going to circle back around to that. But you're describing so far conversations starting initially with individuals. Any large corporate environment that I've been a part of is policy on top of policy, on top of department, on top of procedure, where it's not at all uncommon for fingers to point at other fingers pointing back at those fingers. So when it starts with whomever you're initially engaging with and asking these tough questions, how do those dominoes start to fall to be able to get other people, let alone departments, but just people interacting with other people?
Well, one of the CEOs that I had in one of my CEO forums always used to talk about tone starts from the top. And it does. But the top doesn't have to be the CEO. The top can be the top person in that department or the top person in that team, or it can be any person in the team. At the end of the day, it takes character to be the role model. It really does. It takes courage. It takes humanity, which is an understanding of the other people and the anxieties that they're going to be bringing to the table. It takes a tremendous amount of integrity and just, collaboration to be able to go forward and say, okay, we're going to set tone here. And even though other people that push down on us or, that are peers to us don't want to exist this way, we can actually model the way. It just takes one person to be able to say, we're going to model the way. And, from now on, we're going to tackle things as they happen in real time, not, 14 hours later or 24 hours later, because it's just so unproductive. We talk, I've read an awful lot of things in the paper these days and in documents about anxiety and stress in the workforce and the lack of possibilities to actually even, take on meditation or anything like that, like to engage in any of that. We're so overstressed, but a lot of the stress are our own stories that we're building up. Well, they rolled their eyes in the meeting, so that must mean that they don't think that I'm credible anymore, and that wasn't a good idea. And they may have just even rolled their eyes because they forgot to turn the dryer on when they left to come to work in the morning. And they just remembered it. Has nothing to do with you, but we built these stories. So I keep going back to, it takes a tremendous amount of character to say, you know what, we're going to call things out in real time now. And it starts with you. It doesn't have to be the CEO. It can just start with you. And I know that I'm quite critical of human resources. To me, there are two different types of human resources. There are the human resources people who are there for policies, procedures. That's 1960s style. And thankfully, we are moving away from that. There are great human resources people who believe that they are there to support the business. And they are there. It's not policies of thou shalt not do. It's policies of let's encourage this and let's encourage that. And perhaps even human resources can be the department that encourages that leader character to come out and say, we're spending too much time in the water cooler talk. Let's engage in actioning a conversation in real time.
The policies and procedures of just sort of hiding behind this is just the way it is and there's nothing I can do is one of the
That's such a lazy statement.
But it's still it's so prevalent though, and I believe that whenever sorry to cut you off, Loretta, but that it steals a little bit of the soul and the spirit of the individual within that larger culture. Whenever they have sort of lowered themselves to the point of thinking that's all I can deliver back to whomever, my fellow coworkers, the client, the customer, I guess it comes back to a sign of the larger temperature of the culture overall. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, if the mantra within the organization is that this is the way that we've always done it and there's no room for change, then the discussion internally for you as an individual becomes, is this my culture? Is this really all I'm ever going to be? And am I okay with that? And if it's not, you make a move. Or you start the path on looking for a different place that actually fits with the innovative thought process that you have, the ability to tackle things in real time, the understanding that you are there to support a business consistently and move a needle forward. You want to be creative and engaged. And if those aren't high priorities for you, then okay, stay with, we've always done it this way, and that's okay. That's okay for some. It's just not okay for a lot of people.
Loretta, when we first spoke, you mentioned a word that I tend to use a lot, and quite frankly, I have a lot of people either rolling their eyes at me or telling me they don't know what it means, especially in a business environment. But you used it, and I immediately wrote it down and was intrigued. The word is authenticity. How does that word and that idea play into the work that you do?
Well, people come to the table and I believe that they try and be authentic. And authentic is true to yourself. But we seem to have this persona that I believe we need to bring into the business world. And just, well, that's me authentic with my family. But when I come into the business world and I have to notch that up a bit, well, I don't. In my opinion, you don't. You come in as to who you are, and that kind of stems back to me as in to the whole notion of leader character. Just leader character is something that I work with organizations to help them embrace the character of leadership, which is the courage to do things, and it's the right amount of courage. And humanity. Do you actually see people, or do you just observe? The accountability, the trust factors that everybody has. So I think when it comes to business, sometimes people look at it from, well, maybe we need to be a little bit more on guard than when we're with our family, because with family, they trust that you're trusted, that you're loved. But when you're in a business environment, can you say the same thing? And love doesn't have to come into this, but respected, trusted, appreciated. Do you inspire other people? Do you believe that you're on the same page? And if you're in a team and you don't trust members of the team, or that members of the team don't trust you, there's a problem. So you can't be authentic. But you need to turn that around and figure out, why don't I trust? Why don't they trust me? And have those, have that openness, the authenticity to go into that zone of uncomfortable debate and address the elephant. So what are the vibes that I'm giving off? What am I saying and not actually following through on? We tend to judge other people by the actions that they commit to. And yet we judge ourselves by our intention. So it leaves us wide open for mistrust. Because you can't have that double-edged sword. So are you being authentic? Are you judging yourself by the actions that you put forward, not the intentions that you have? Because that's how you're judging other people.
What kind of responses do you get when you bring up the idea of authenticity, or even asking people or challenging them of what that means to them or who they are? How is that received?
Well, I don't actually use the word very much when I bring it up in front of clients or potential clients. I use it in terms of are you real? And most of the coaching that I do and most of the training that I do, I'm pretty open. I'm not going to use the big word and saying, well, are you really being authentic? I look at people and say, are you serious? And you know, like, and that's questioning, like, are you being real right now? And that, I think, opens up in a friendly way to be able to, you know, for people to say, well, yeah, maybe I'm pontificating and I'm on my high horse, and it brings them down. But if you ask them, like, are you being authentic? It's too, I think it's just too much. But we know, like, both parties know, you're looking at the same thing. Just it's a softer way of approaching it. So when I actually call people out, frankly, the higher up in an organization and the more the individual really believes that they're looking at leadership more than anything else, they welcome that, because they don't have very many people that call them out. Their spouse might call them out. Their mom might call them out. Their dad might call them out, you know, depending on, you know, where you are in your the age group that you're at. But when you're working that you're in the top echelon, how many people do you have in your organization that actually do call you out? And they should be able to, because that's really having an organization that is based on leader character. And to use that word authentic, that is an authentic organization.
I love when you're saying about, are you real? That brings me to something else that I wrote down from when we spoke at first a few weeks back, which was, quote, we care about our people. And when I heard you say that, my mind went to some of the organizations that I've worked for, most recently a very large organization that has in their manuals and words on a wall about how much they care about their people. And yet, being one of the people that was supposed to be cared about, that was met with a lot of rolling of the eyes and, in fact, looking around for some other place to be because you didn't really feel cared about. How does one organization take that from being not just words in a mission statement or an employee manual, but to something that is actually believed and accepted and acted upon in an organization?
Well, in a lot of organizations, especially when you're talking about organization and change, and I don't know a lot of them that aren't in situations of change, there are always going to be people who Porter calls them the weak and the wounded. So they're not 100% sure of the direction. They maybe don't ramp up as quickly as everybody else does. They're fully on board. They're engaged in what needs to take place, but they're struggling with it. And how many times do we as leaders just kind of walk on by and think, well, somebody else will take care of that? As a leader, we need to see that. And we need to see we've got people who are struggling. And stop and look at it and engage with it and say, you know, how can I help you? How can I help you? It's one thing to say that we care about our people, but if we keep walking on by, when you know somebody's struggling and no one's going back to help, so to speak, then that's not actually actioning, you know, the whole phrase of we care about our people. It becomes a blah, blah, blah. And people's eyes glaze over. And if you can't see me, you can't see that I'm struggling and that I'm having difficulty and I'm afraid to maybe put my hand up, because if you can't even see me, what happens if I actually do in front of all of my peers say, I don't get this, or I'm having trouble with this, then I'm isolated even that much further. So there's a wonderful video that was done by the Cleveland Clinic a few years ago. And it's, you know, as you're walking into a hospital setting, or it's, do you see people? You see somebody with a smile on their face. And, you know, the message behind that is, you know, just had my first, you know, my wife just had our first child. You see somebody else with a very concerned look on their face. You know, they found a lump in my mammogram, or, you know, just a dog coming into the hospital to soothe the wife and the daughter of somebody who's literally on their deathbed. Do you see that when you're walking by people? Everybody's got a story inside their head. And we need to have, I think, a little bit of empathy to be able to reach back and recognize concern, recognize fear, recognize misunderstandings, recognize anger, and deal with it. Feel about it. Seek your people. They're people. They're your best. They're everybody talks about. They're our best asset, our people. But if you don't see them, how do you consider them to be an asset? You walk on by. It's like that song Dionne Warwick did.
Yeah.
Just walk on by.
I wonder about the other side of that too, where maybe it doesn't come from as much a place of, I'll say, fear or fitting in on the individual's part, but what about from those who are challengers, high performers, out-of-the-box thinkers that also can be seen, but and maybe even need to be for the organization's own benefit, but in a lot of cases, those in the organization are afraid of that particular innovation or challenge to the culture or status quo. Do you see what I'm getting at with this?
Yeah, there's the positive, like they're the changers, and they're not going to be the maintenance people. They don't want to maintain an organization. They always want to look at something, turn it on its head and say, we can do that better, and here's how. Or there's something else that can be done. I mean, if organizations like a 3M didn't look at that type of person, we would never have a Post-it note, ever. Because it's, we're only going to Abilene. We weren't going on the road to build Post-it notes. We were going here, and that's it. So it does become what do you do with Steve Jobs used to call them the crazies. He had one of his ads was all about the crazies, and we need to embrace that. Companies don't. I don't know that a lot of people know what to do with the crazies that are in the organization, the innovators, the people who will challenge, the people who never think inside the box. They're always trying to look at another angle to be able to do things. We need to embrace that. How organizations do that sometimes is everything from isolating them and letting them be, workforce on their own to putting them with other people who sometimes just slow them down and almost suck the breath out of them, like literally, and they leave.
I've been wondering about what you think the balance is between, I'm going to use this word again, authentically, seeing people on whichever side of the equation that we just talked about. So if you're the one that's in the role of a high-level executive in an organization, from that perspective, the balance between truly seeing people, whatever it is that they bring or whatever maybe anxieties they're trying to work through about fitting in and contributing, those kinds of things, versus fitting in with the existing culture and driving it forward. How can leaders balance those two?
Well, what are you trying to get done? Like Covey says, begin with the end in mind. If you're looking to improve anything, whether it's a product, a system, an SOP, then, just there comes a time where you say, you embrace, you perhaps embrace the innovators, the crazies a little bit more. If you're looking to just maintain, then maybe it's, we're good enough. I don't know that there really is a balance, but maybe the balance is a movable metric. It's whatever works in your organizations, whatever the job needs to be done within a company. The best way to actually demotivate an innovator is to say we're good enough. The best way to demote somebody who likes maintenance is to say we're not good enough. So you have to read your people. And then there again, we come back to you have to see who they are and see the comfort level that they're in. Put them into the right teams.
I love how succinctly you're able to answer one of my questions with an immediate question, simple question. So an example is, what are you trying to get done? Well, what I've found in so many of my travels, personally and professionally, is that the most impactful and lasting things are often the simplest. Doesn't necessarily make that easy, but at their core, very simple. And from right where we started about asking tough questions and just getting right to the point and naming the elephant in the room, it brings me to something else that I have written down. I came into this conversation, Loretta, with a shopping list because I had a lot of curiosity from our initial talk that I wanted to make sure I got to ask you about. 2 words. And I'm wondering where some of that, let's just get right to the issue, because we can't really afford to be spinning around the room, messing around. And the 2 words are fighter pilots. And I'm wondering how that part of your past, if I can ask you to give some context to that, may or may not have fed into just kind of getting to the point.
Well, I My mentor was an individual by the name of Jack Wilkinson, and I worked with him for 12 years when I was a lobbyist. And Jack was he was in the Canadian Air Force. He was he used to teach pilots how to fly the F-18s. And he was probably, this is going back years ago, so he was probably one of the first to have flown the Canadian F-18s. He was so succinct in everything that he did that it was amazing. It never ceased to amaze me how quickly he could just get to the heart of the issue, because the objective was not to have a meeting after a meeting after a meeting after a meeting. I mean, there's a book on the market now called Death by Meetings. Well, Jack was anti-death by meetings. You got to the issue quickly, you figured out a game plan, and you moved forward. So our meetings were really succinct. Everybody came to the table prepared. There was a dissemination of ideas that were put around the table. And what initially frustrated me, and then I learned to develop over time and have carried it forward, was he was the last to speak. And it's, well before the time when Simon Sinek came out with, Leaders Eat Last and his presentation on Leaders Speak Last. Jack was doing that well before that. So we knew those principles before. If we had an issue that we had to talk about, there were 16 of us in the group. So the issue was put on the table. Everybody would put out ideas, and it didn't matter how great the idea was or how not great the idea was. He wouldn't say anything. And at the end, when everybody had put everything on the table, so it was all exposed, he would come in and he'd say, "Let me get this straight." And he would pull out what each person would say and put it back into a succinct order so that it built a case or demolished a case for moving towards that avenue and it was so clean, so crisp, so succinct. It dealt in one swoop. It dealt with strategy. It dealt with conflict management. It dealt with, the whole aspect of knowing what your goal is. Stephen Covey talks about it all the time. Begin with the end in mind. What are you trying to accomplish? Clayton Christensen has come out just recently with a new book called Job Theory. What's the job to be done? And literally, it's not anything more than begin with the end in mind. What are you trying to do? It saves hours. Because people go off on, I always talk about it in terms of they go off on a road to Abilene. Nobody's going to Abilene. That's not the job to be done. The job is to do this. We don't need tangents. We don't need to make things bigger than they are. We don't need to make things as more complicated than they are. You go straight up the middle. And that's when I learned from the fighter pilot, literally. You go straight up the middle.
Is that what clarity means?
Yeah. That's a great observation, Kevin. It is. Clarity is, what are you trying to get done? And in business worlds now, they talk about VUCA. It's a VUCA environment, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, there's another message that goes with VUCA. It's moving it over to VUCA Prime. And VUCA Prime would stand for, you take the volatility and you start with vision. You take the uncertainty and you start with, what do you understand? You take complexity and it moves over to clarity, and you take the ambiguity and you move it over to agility. If you started every single meeting with the vision rather than volatility, we have a problem. And the problem is this: we need to provide this solution. That's vision. Versus we start off with a problem in a meeting, and we've got a client that wants, and they start listing everything off, and they start going down the rabbit hole of every problem that is coming up. The salespeople are talking about this, engineering is saying this, finances. That's volatile stuff. Vision is the client needs this. Here's the solution that needs to be provided. If we started off with a clean vision, how much more clarity would there be in every single meeting that we had? And meetings would be a lot shorter.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just shared. I was still trying to remember what the letters in VUCA stood for. I got as far as volatility when I started writing down everything else that you shared about starting the meeting with vision. And I also was starting to try to think about how many meetings have I ever been in that did not start with a problem? And I can't now, granted, I was trying to listen to you, but at the same time, I don't know that I can immediately think of one, Loretta. That explains a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. So why did you go to a meeting? What was the purpose of the meeting? Like, what was the vision of the meeting? Or was it, we have a meeting at 11 o'clock, we got a number of things to talk about? That's a volatile environment. They're automatically going into a meeting that is set up in volatility. But if you were called to a meeting and the meeting was, we have a problem with this company, the product that we're developing is not fitting into, the product that it has to go into, you immediately have a vision. We have a problem. And the vision for the meeting is to solve that problem.
This, to me, listening to you explain it that way, Loretta, plays right back into what you were talking about of seeing people and being real about that is in ways that we might not even necessarily perceive that we're affecting the people that we're relying upon to move our business forward and the leaders of the business by saddling them with, or maybe they're saddling themselves with and they aren't aware of it, coming into this thing of, oh my gosh, maybe they're dealing with this the night before and they're not sleeping because they know they've got this 8 o'clock meeting and they're going to be leading with the problem. And as soon as the people sit down, it's like somebody dumped this bag of waste on the boardroom table. And now what are we going to do about it? That takes its toll, doesn't it?
It does. It does. But you're churning. You're churning and you're churning unnecessarily. I love when I do training and development, I love showing clips. Do you remember the movie Apollo? Houston, we have a problem.
Yep.
Okay. So Tom Hanks plays the character, and I can't remember the name of the character that he actually plays.
Jim Lovell.
But okay, Jim. Okay. So remember the scene where they dump on the table all the tools that are available on the Apollo that could potentially be used to fix a problem.
Yeah. I love that scene.
Why should that scene not play into every meeting that takes place in an organization? And it goes back to Jack Wilkinson's, milieu of, just, okay, we've got to talk about this. Everybody starts dumping all the potential solutions or parts on the table. And then it's one by one. You ferret through them. This could work. This could work. Maybe these two pieces can work. And you strategize. Like in business, we have to be good at strategy. So, but we're dealing with strategy of, wow, that person rolled their eyes when I spoke. And then you're off on a story now because somebody rolled their eyes, but you're not paying attention to the problem. It's Houston. We have a problem. Let's deal with it.
And what's our vision? Get everybody back home.
Yes.
In that case.
Yeah. And it's such a succinct clip.
Yeah.
Just here's the problem. Here's the vision. We need to get them home. And you 5 people are in the room with everything that's on the Apollo to be able to make that happen. So go make it happen.
What's it like when you see those lights actually go on for the people you're working with? First of all, it becomes this surprise because it's simple. Yeah.
But we have built this complexity into everything that I think it's a lost art of being a child. Children don't add complexity. The older that we get taught to, we have to look at complexity because, a simple solution, maybe that won't demonstrate just how smart I am or how schooled I am or how read I am if I just bring up a simple solution. I think we have to make it complex, and maybe that makes us feel better. I don't know. But the older that we get, the more complex. And yet I think there's a tipping point that when you do get to a certain age, you look at it, and I think I've tipped to that age where it's sort of like, I got to find out life here. Your mortality sort of comes up, a little bit quicker, and you think, I don't need complexity. I just need to get through this and get to the other side. And if you're bogging me down with complexity that has nothing to do with solving a problem, I'm not paying attention. I don't need to.
When, if ever, have you had to remind yourself of that in the building and growing and maintaining of your own business?
The complexity, the solution.
Keep it just simple, the vision, all of what you just said.
There come times where you make decisions and you start taking into consideration, who will I hurt by making this decision? And Kevin, I made a decision just a little while ago to leave an organization that I was contracting with. And it was very difficult because I looked at it from the aspect of the people that I was working with, that I was serving. Basically, I cared deeply about them. I cared deeply about their capabilities of moving forward, and I enjoyed the work. On the other hand, my values and the values of the organization that I represented were at complete odds. So I teach leader character, and the organization that I represented at that particular time knew nothing about nor embraced anything surrounding leader character. The retention rate of deliverers for that program was 21%. That's not a good retention rate. So there's something clearly wrong in the organization. So it becomes, I got mired up with, I wanted to help them. I wanted to please them. I really enjoyed what I was doing. And it just became this complex thing. And it was literally my husband who looked at me and he says, Loretta, he said, what do you know in your heart is the right thing to do? And the right thing was to leave. Because you can't be who you're not. And you can't talk about it and not be, you can't talk about authenticity. You can't talk about clarity. You can't talk about leader character and not embody that in your whole life. And sometimes it's just hard. You make the decision and you move forward. And quite frankly, Kevin, it's the best decision that I ever made because I've never been happier or more content in what I'm doing. And I look at a lot of people in the workforce who are working for bosses that their character doesn't, like their values don't coincide and they're stuck. And I feel bad for them. And sometimes you are stuck because you've got mortgages, you've got car payments, kids that, need orthodontic work and you can't move yourself out. But you can try and stay true to yourself and just recognize it's a job for the time being and move forward when you can.
How often have you had to do that over your career?
I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, and this was the first time. It's not the first contract that I've had working for organizations, but Kevin, this was the first time that I didn't read any of the signals right, and that's the piece that boggles me because I profile people, and I just didn't see this one coming at all. So this was the one for me. But it was enough. It was enough. It made a huge impact.
Maybe I can ask it this way. How often, if at all, do you find that you have to disqualify an organization from taking them on because you're able to discern or presuppose that values are not going to be in alignment and then maybe suggest that they look for another solution? Sorry, I didn't. I asked and then I didn't let you answer.
That's fine. I've done that. I've fired clients, and it's just. I've fired clients that I've coached, and it's just, time after time after time, you're having the same conversation over and over and over again, and that's not how I want to coach. I want to coach to be able to provide the avenue and mechanisms to move forward. If you're not willing to move forward, I'm not your coach. Like I tell my clients before we actually sign contracts that I'm not your mom. I'm not going to coddle you. I will push, I will drive, I will challenge. And that's that, if that's the kind of coach that you want, then let's move forward. And there are some people who have said that's exactly what I want as a coach, but they don't. They want the mom. And you know what? There are other coaches that can do that. I don't want to hold people's hands. I will help them move forward. But I have 3 children and I love them. I don't want any more. Thank you. I've fired clients because the characteristics that take place within the organizations don't gel with my values. I have not taken on assignments. I remember there was an organization that asked me to come and do some work for them, and they were an organization that were literally it was a video game company that were building shooter games, and frankly, that doesn't resonate with me. And I don't particularly. My own personal beliefs is that young children shouldn't be sitting in front of video games learning how to annihilate cities, so to speak. I understand their strategy in it, but it's just not mine. So I didn't take the assignment. It's not my gig.
This over the last few minutes, we're talking about things like values and seeing that those are in alignment with whatever you're doing, whom you're working for, what opportunities you decide to embark upon or not. And this takes us right back to where we were a half hour or so ago about authenticity and really understanding who you are, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's very observant. It is. I've tried to stay true to myself. I have. I'm not saying that I'm, better than anybody else. I've faltered. But at the end of the day, I have to look at myself in the mirror. And if I can look at myself in the mirror while I'm brushing my teeth, getting ready to go to bed, and say, you did good today. And I want to say that more often than I say, wow, Loretta, this was not one of your best days. I want most of my days to say you did good today.
I point that out only because I know from my own experience, Loretta, that I didn't know what that was for me. And there was so much anxiety. I've always been a really hard worker and a high performer, but can look back now and see with clarity and the benefit of hindsight that I had been a number of times in situations that didn't align with I now know to be my values. But for so long, I just didn't even have an awareness to cast an awareness upon that or even to think about it. It just was the way it was, and you were just sort of bumping along, riding the river of however that business or opportunity was going. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that in order to help somebody understand whether there's alignment there, whether they're within an organization as an employee, as an executive, or however that might look, or more at a capacity where they're choosing those they work with and for, as you might do, that's still an individual job, isn't it, to understand oneself and values?
Yeah, it is. And you really have to stop pretending not to know something, because sometimes it's easy to bury it under the rug. You know internally you're out of sorts. You're misaligned. You're not comfortable. You're not, and it goes back to what you talked about. You become anxious. You lose sleep. You lose your grounding. You become something that you're not. And we have to stay cognizant of what the environments that we're putting ourselves into, what it's actually doing to us and for us. I'm not saying that there aren't times in life that are stressful, but it's in times of stress and it's in times of failure that your real character comes out and you align yourself with your real values.
One of the things I love about this conversation about what you do is how everything loops back upon itself and the pieces all fit, because with what you're just describing there about the anxiousness and the lost sleep, and it brings me back right to something else you've already shared. What are we trying to do here? Yeah. And now we're right back to, are we looking at a vision or are we looking at a problem? Are we dumping the things on the table that's going to help us get Apollo 13 back home with everybody alive? Or are we just focusing on why we can't sleep and why the anxiousness is there? And I point that out, Loretta, because I think that, in the business world, personal world as well, because we all make excuses for ourselves and we don't make it as simple when, as you've noted, I think we already know. We just want to make there has to be a more complex problem why I feel the way that I do. But in the business world and in marketing, I often think about, coming up with a gimmick or a way or a mission is almost like trying to believe what lie you told last. Whereas if you just tell the truth, then it becomes really, really simple. And I'm thinking about that while I'm listening to your talk, because all of the pieces seem to connect in everything that you're doing. And that seems to be the power of transparency, authenticity, and just simplicity, isn't it?
Yeah, well, my mother was wise beyond her years. She taught us from a very very young age because kids tend to lie. Like I mean, just it's you don't want to get caught doing something you weren't supposed to, so you make up a lie. And my mom used to look at me and she said, "Loretta," she said, "Are you telling me the truth?" And I'd look up at her and she said, "Because I want you to know you're not smart enough to remember all the lies. It's just easier to tell the truth." And when I was little, I mean, I remember putting my hands on my hips saying, like, I am too smart. But you know what? I'm not. I'm not smart enough to remember, did I tell that person that lie and that person that? I don't want to keep track of it. It's just easier to tell the truth.
What do you enjoy most about what you do?
That's a really great question. I love watching people sit back in their chair and go, "Oh, okay, I get it." I like, I enjoy being that vehicle. I think that's probably the right word, getting people unstuck. Quite frankly, Kevin, there's not much about what I do that I don't enjoy. It all has to do with people. It all has to do with helping people get from point A to point B and getting there in a much more succinct fashion. And than they probably thought that they could have. I've been very fortunate in my life to have mentors that have guided me, that have shaped me, and have smacked me upside the head and said, "What the heck are you thinking?" And done that with generosity, compassion, humanity, and trust.
How do you balance when you're constantly aware that we really can make these what seem like complex issues really simple, but in each, it's unfair to say in so many of the situations that you go into, you'll find people that in a lot of cases might not necessarily be any fault of their own, because just as I described myself, a lot of us are unaware that we're unaware, but just absolutely bound and determined to see these simple things with such complexity. How do you balance, knowing we're either going to get this to come around to what's really a simple solution or not, but have the patience to do that and sort of meet that with openness and compassion when this is really a lot simpler than I'm hearing that it is from the people I'm working with.
Mm-hmm. When someone doesn't want help, you can't help them. And here's something that I learned. It's an old farm phrase. I mean, in the farming world, women. There are a lot of women who are teachers because that's basically what they did to help support the farm. And I learned this from a number of friends who were teachers, but they were supported. Well, they were married to farmers. They were actually farm owners. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. You can't teach somebody. You can't help somebody that doesn't want to be taught and doesn't want to be helped. So what I've learned is the same as when I've said, I'm not everybody's coach. I'm not everybody's teacher. I'm not everybody's guide. I'm not everybody's, answer. I can't help everybody. You need to want to be helped, and you need to be open to doing that. And maybe you're not this year. Next year, a teacher will appear and you'll be ready. Because have you ever looked at problems and you're mired in that problem, and all of a sudden you might walk into a bookstore and you'll see a book that actually, that might help me with my solution. Or you wind up in a conversation and you think, wow, I was just thinking about this thing that I've been agonizing about what to do. And all of a sudden the conversation takes place that you are part of that can help you with it. You're paying attention to that book that's on the shelf, or the conversation that's taking place on a radio program or at a table or within a grouping of people, because now you've recognized the teacher has appeared. You're open, you're receptive to listening to it. If you're not receptive, you're not going to hear it. It's conversation you'll walk on by.
I love how so much of what you've shared in the last hour or so, I'm looking for the right vocabulary. I really appreciate things that are very powerful solutions in the moment, but also for the long haul. And, when you're looking at very sort of timeless, simple strategies that you know that you're going to be happy with this decision, not just 10 minutes from now, 10 months from now, 10 years from now. And I kind of grin thinking about that, because so much of what you do seems to be built for endurance, even in your own personal time. I mean, you can go on a bicycle for a long period of time, can't you? You can walk through all kinds of different terrain. What's your attraction to endurance and things that last?
Oh God, I never wanted to be complacent. I learned how to ski when I was in my 50s, and the reason, and I'm afraid of heights, and I never thought I'd get on skis. The reason why I did it was because I was too much in my head. I'd started a company. I'd started Genesis Executive, not too much earlier than when I just turned 50. And I was too much in my head, and I knew that I had to get out of my head, and I had to do something that challenged me differently. So I learned how to ski. The next time that I got into, it wasn't complacency. It was, in a problem where I knew I just couldn't figure my own way out. I started to ride the velodrome, which, now when I look at it and I see pictures of myself on the velodrome, and I'm thinking, you did what? Like, are you out of your mind? But it was the right thing to do. I don't like being predictable, and I don't like being stuck. So for me, it becomes this, what do I need to do, and what do I need to put into my life that will allow me to challenge myself? The bike rides, I've done centuries, and which are 100 kilometers at a time. And I love riding bike. You get to a point where my bike weighs 9 pounds. So, you invest in the bike. I'm not hauling around on a 50, 60 pound bike. But you do that because it's clarity. It's where I don't think about anything. But when I get off the bike, I have solutions. Somewhere along the line, it comes to me, and I'm not even thinking about it. So I challenge myself. That's why I do those things.
What maybe immediately comes to mind of what's on the list of potential challenges, be them personal or professional, that you see or hope to be one day ahead of you, Loretta?
Great question. I don't really know how to answer that. I'll take every challenge as it comes along. The challenges that I think I have are probably my own internal gremlins that maybe people will think I'm too strong. Like, everybody has their own, faults that they believe are blaring. So it's maybe taking myself too seriously. The challenge that I have. Frankly, it's one of those things, Kevin. I don't know where it comes from, but I know that whatever challenges get put in front of me, I will figure out a solution. And I think it's years of experience, and it's belief in capabilities, and belief in, if I don't have the immediate solution, I know my teacher will appear, and I'll listen, and I'll learn.
What you have shared today, I hope the people that are still with us, that have listened through this, have paid attention and will go back and listen again, because you've shared a lot that can be of great value to people who are looking for help and are wanting to learn and find solutions. And for anyone who's not, for the life of me, I can't imagine why they'd still be listening to you and I. But you have been so generous with sharing what I think is so much really valuable insight, Loretta, and I am constantly amazed by who will share time with me and what they'll share of themselves simply by showing a willingness to learn and by asking. And I'm really, really grateful that you would spend this time with me and for the benefit of anybody that takes the time to listen. And I look forward to more conversations down the road. But thank you so much for this time, Loretta.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure. And, you have a gift, and your gift is that you allow other people to open up. You ask your questions in a way that provide your speakers and your audience to think differently. And that's a powerful tool.
If you'd like to learn more about Loretta or connect with her, you can do so at her website for Genesis Executive Management. You can find that at genesis-em.com. I'll spell that for you. GENESIS-EM.com. Genesis-EM.com. You can also find Loretta and connect with her on LinkedIn by searching Loretta Smith. You're looking for the one from Genesis Executive Management. If you like this episode, I'm almost certain that you're going to love episode 60 with Jim Estel, the CEO of Danby Appliances. It's called Putting People First and Building Business That Scales on Doing the Right Thing. That's episode 60. Episode 52 also came to mind for me as I was listening to Loretta talk. That's with Andre Radmal. It's called Finding Who You Are versus the Role You Play. Finding who you really are versus the role that you play. And Andre works with a lot of businesses on helping people discover that as well, which plays into some of the aspects of authenticity and understanding your values that Loretta and I talked about. And episode 30 with Bob Parker, Driving High-Performing Cultures. Give that one a listen as well. That's episode 30 with Bob Parker. You can find those and all archived episodes of Journeys with the No Schedule Man on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Libsyn, iHeartRadio, Google Play Music, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. To connect with me, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. My handle on each of those platforms is simply No Schedule Man. And if you'd like to work with me personally, I'd love to hear from you. There are a few ways that we can do that. You can learn more about my speaking, workshops, seminars, upcoming events, one-on-one or group coaching opportunities. Information on all of that is available at kevinbulmer.com. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and share, and I hope to have you here with me next week on Journeys with the No Schedule Man.
Just a little deja vu.